comrades. This is Chief Guard of the Republic Radio Show with your co-hosts Mike Tooman and Paul Burvitt every Saturday noon to 1, except today we're going to be noon to 2, especially special holiday season 2-hour show. We're on WRMN 1410 AM and the Fox River Valley Media Network, streaming on 1410.com. Our studio call-in numbers here at Studio 14 on Douglas Avenue. For voice are 847-931-1410. Text us at 505-926-1410. Or you could hit us up in the comments on the Facebook Live WRMN 1410 channel. So, hey, there's Paul. Paul's zooming in again today. All right, so today, one of the things that's always kind of angered me a bit is how many people can be frightened into action for no reason because of statements that are made and fear-mongering when you could clearly look up online with a little bit of research that what they're saying is either impossible, unlikely, or flat out untrue, that it just wouldn't happen. You know, I guess in a world you could pass a law and the president could sign a law and then everything could go, you know, but we had I spent over 10 years in psychological operations back in the day. And we had we had defined PSYOPs as 3 types of psychological operations: white, black, and gray. Black PSYOPs was a flat out lie. That you made something up, it's a flat out lie. And it's intended to scare people and just scare people and everything. And the dangers of using that are you lose your credibility. Once you tell a flat out lie, you lose your credibility. People stop listening to you. It might take a while, but you've lost your credibility. And especially when something's so easy to disprove or verify in the reverse, right? Then there's gray psychological operations where it may or may not be true, but you really can't prove it, you know, or you can't prove it from where you're at. You get sort of like flat earthers on that, right? You're standing on Earth. How can you really tell if it's actually a globe and it's curved, or if gravity actually exists anywhere else other than Earth, or if people have actually been in space, or it's just something. So that's kind of like a gray psyop there, you know, hard to prove. And again, we did not use that because if you could disprove it, you lose your credibility. Then there was white psyops, all right, telling the flat out truth, all right? So like, we have a lot more soldiers in Iraq. It was like, we got more soldiers, better equipped, better trained, better explosives, better everything else. We're going to clobber you. And it was enough to drop leaflets showing that, now not everywhere, or have loudspeaker messages over there that a lot of their conscripted soldiers just turned themselves in. They basically did not want to die. All right, so what I see now in a lot of the press, I guess there's mainstream media, but I heard a new term today, legacy media. And it's like, okay, legacy, that means they're old school, they're done with. It's like, yeah, people might still listen to 8 tracks, but you don't see them. So now they're talking like CNN, MSNBC, legacy media. And part of the reason I think is because they've lost a lot of their credibility. So one of the biggest fears is, oh, we're going to go to war. Oh, World War III is going to happen. Oh, the new president is going to carry us into World War III because he's a dictator. He's a dictator and he's just going to do whatever he wants, you know, and that'll cause World War III, and then we're all going to get drafted no matter what, and we're going to get sent overseas, and we're all going to die. And they're going to send over, you know, they're going to send people to your doors to grab you, to throw you on the bus and send you out to the front lines, much is like what's happening in the Ukraine. All right, but that is untrue. All right, now you can't prove a negative, right? So they could say this is going to happen in the future, but the future hasn't happened. So how can I say this isn't going to happen? Because past actions have proven otherwise. So for 4 years before, for 4 years ago, we were not in World War III. And 8 years ago, World War III didn't start. All right. So like future actions. Now, there's laws. Yeah,
the War Powers Resolution has been in effect for 51 years, so it kind of does not allow that.
Yeah, the Congress, after everyone was, wasn't much preventing the president from sending troops up everywhere he wanted, and the Vietnam War had already dragged on for almost 10 years. And that's not including advisors we had over there before. Like 65 when they started the draft to 73 when they stopped the draft, and so Congress and President Nixon was president at the time. And so Congress passed the War Powers Act, and he vetoed it because he felt that they were trying to take away the power of the commander-in-chief, which the president is the commander-in-chief. But Congress acknowledged that. But they said that they had the right to declare war and to fund a war. And true enough, Congress holds the purse strings. That's their control over the government. I think we've seen Congress lose that control over the years, because now, again, it's the big fear mongering. There's going to be a government shutdown, and the Chinese are going to invade and take us over while the doors of the White House are closed. Oh, yeah. And again, fear mongering. You don't want that to happen. Social Security checks won't come in. Oh, people won't get paid. Oh, Christmas is a terrible time without money. However, Congress has lost its effort to control the purse strings. The programs come in, they spend money on the programs without authorization, and then Congress passes a bill, an omnibus bill, a continuous resolution to pay the bills that they didn't authorize in the first place. So what Congress says is, in the War Powers Act, the president is still the commander-in-chief, and he could send forces anywhere in the world, U.S. forces anywhere in the world, for 60 days. But he needs to notify Congress first. And if Congress doesn't pass an okay resolution, then he has to have those forces pulled out by 90 days in. All right? And they could also pass a resolution saying, we don't agree with that, pull the forces out now. All right. So that was the War Powers Act. And that has come into effect every time since 1973 when we sent forces into harm's way. All right. So the president acknowledges to the Congress that, okay, I got the forces here. I used them. It's for national defense. He puts a reason in. And then the Congress authorizes that spending. All right. Now, the Congress can also say, well, it is an ongoing national emergency, and then the president, because it's declared a national emergency, then the president can call up reserve forces, right? Not drafting people. The president cannot institute a draft. In fact, the president has the right, if Congress passed the draft resolution, the president can veto it, forcing Congress to give a 2/3 majority to override that. All right. So if there's going to be a draft, all right, it's going to be on Congress and your representatives. So people are all afraid, oh, I'm going to get drafted. Do I still have to register for the draft? Yes, you got to register for the draft at 18 because it's important we talked about this before. It's very important for national defense to kind of have an eye on how many people we have ready to go in time of war, where we can throw them into basic training, some skill training, some unit training, and get them anywhere in the world in like 3 months. We have active duty forces, we have reserve and National Guard forces, but as those forces become depleted and need replacements, we may have to draft. That's not only for wartime, though. All right, so the draft can be used in peacetime. Two, if there are recruiters can't do the job and people don't want to join the Army, and Congress determines the strength of the Army, not the president, not the Joint Chiefs of Staff, no one else. Again, this all falls on Congress, your representatives, and rightfully so. We're a republic, all right? And they control the size of the Army, the federal Army, and the reserves. So if Congress says, oh, well, you only have 800,000 and we want 1 million in. Well, we can't recruit 1 million. Well, they could call them up from the reserves. The Secretary of the Army, they could authorize Secretary of the Army to call people up from the active reserve to fill those positions. I believe they have a limit of 300,000. So I could be sitting, I could still be recalled as a retiree. So one day they might say, hey, we need a CW5 here. And they could recall me, and it's legit, to fill those things. And the Congress has already given the authority to the Secretary of the Army to issue retiree recalls. I don't know what they've done. I don't have access to those web pages anymore. But they call it up in peacetime. All right, so they could actually institute a draft in peacetime to start filling the slots that the recruiters cannot fill. So there's still a chance, even if we're not at war, that the draft can be there. So getting back down to it, so everything, as we saw, there's been the only person that could declare war is Congress. That's it. Congress has to vote on a declaration of war. And again, the president can veto that. Unlikely if Congress is going to pass a resolution of war. That's a serious thing, right? But he could veto it, and then they could override him. And we'd have war, and the president's now the commander-in-chief, and he has to go to a war that he doesn't want to go to because Congress told him to. All right, so once you get that act and appropriations to fill these things, he has the authority. And back in the day, when I was first in the reserves, when I first got called up to reserves, there were several levels of a presidential call-up, emergency presidential call-up. The first level was for 90 days. They can extend you to 180. So it's just kind of a minor thing, and he was limited to only so many forces. The second level was 180 days, and they can extend you to 270 days. So the first one, when I went to Haiti, Haiti was, all right, President Clinton sent us into Haiti. He did not notify Congress he was doing that. He just, boom, sent the forces into Haiti under his own authority, and then later on told Congress, right? And Congress said, well, we really don't like this, but he didn't care. So after a while, that's why we were called up to from the reserves, right? We're called up for 90 days, extendable to 180. But later on, Congress said, okay, and a lot of us got extended for another 90 days to be in theater because it got approval of Congress. The next time was when I went to Bosnia, and they called us up for 180 days, extendable to 270, and that was extended right away, brother. We were there for 270. Then the main call up, right, for Desert Storm, when Desert Storm came around, came around before that, those call ups were for a year, 1 year, and they could be extendable to 2 years. And if you got called up on a presidential call up order, that emergency, you can only be called up for a total of 2 years on each presidential call up order. Later on, I believe in 2008, Congress changed that. And to give the Department of Defense and to give the, I guess, president, at the time, it was President Obama, to give him more authority to use more troops. So they said, oh, you could get called up multiple times on the same presidential call-up order, but you can't be for more than 2 consecutive years. So they call you up for a year and 364 days, let you go home, call you up the next day. Oh, it's not consecutive. We gave you a day off. And here's the thing. Is that likely to happen? No. All right. Could it happen? Oh, yeah, sure. It could happen. It could happen. And that would require, you would have to be the only guy that had the codes and knew how to get everyone paid. All right. And they called you up from the reserve so everyone could get paid, but now you got to go home and no one can figure out your job. So now they're going to call you back and say, no, you're too important. You're way too important. We're going to keep you on. And then the final call up is if there is a declaration of war, all right, then the president could call up all the reserves, all of the reserves. And that's for the entire war. So it's like you don't just get called up for 2 years. You're there until the war, until at maximum 6 months after the war is over. So 6 months after the peace treaty signed, you got to be home. All right, so that's the final one. That's the big one for calling up the reserves. And as a part of that, the National Guard. So in the reserves, people think, oh, there's only the Army Reserve, but there's not. There's also the Air Force Reserve. There's also the Navy Reserve, the Marine Corps Reserve. All right. Right. There's a Coast Guard Reserve. They fall under Title 14. All right. But they could, it's almost mirrors the same thing. So they could also be called up. All right, for president, and like for the duration of the war. And then you have the draft, all right, and the draft time is like 2 years. But once you're drafted, you also have a service. The service, it used to be 6 years, but now it's 8 years. So you may get drafted for 2 years, but you still have 6 years in the, what they call the, if you don't go active reserve or you don't go active National Guard, they could put you in the individual ready reserve, or you could opt to go into the individual ready reserve part of the National Guard. And now getting back there, you see in Desert Storm and everything, we had a lot of Guard units getting activated. And the main reason for that is your Guard units are your combat arms. They're your shooters, right? So they got the big guns, the big artillery. They have the infantry guys. They have the tankers. They have the scouts. They have all the, the air cav, all the combat arms forces, attack helicopters and everything. Where in the reserves, we have combat support. We have medical units. We have transportation units. We have military intelligence units, MP units, everything that would support a combat unit overseas or a unit in combat. But there are infantry in the reserves. They're in the training units. They're drill sergeants. And they got called, in the summer, they get called to active duty to give the drill sergeants at the big posts a break so they could have a couple weeks off, because these guys are, honestly, it's one of the toughest jobs in the military, being a drill sergeant. I would list the toughest jobs in the military: number one, cook; number two, drill sergeant. that's it. I mean, those are some tough jobs. Kind of, I don't think I would have fit into any of them. And so, am I getting off track here? Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes here. And so now, the National Guard, the president can call them up. But the governor can call them up, but the governor does not have to comply with the presidential call-up of his forces. We fought a whole civil war over this stuff, right? So we're a republic, and the militia forms the republic, right? Militia defends the republic. Each state is a militia. However, when it comes to funding, if the governor doesn't comply with a federal call-up, then Congress is authorized to not fund that National Guard anymore. That means withdrawing all the states can't afford, a state really can't afford to keep an entire infantry division or armored division with the tanks, the fuel, the maintenance, paying for everyone on active duty, 2 weeks out of the year being paid for active duty, full-time active duty support. All that stuff is pretty much funded by Congress, mandated by the Constitution, but also if the governor doesn't comply, he loses that funding. So it's kind of like the way they keep the state, going now. Now, since Desert Storm, that really hasn't happened, and they don't really want to play games with that because, again, they have to maintain a National Guard. and you start having these infighting and everything, I think the politicians know which states they can call up and which states they shouldn't call up. You know, so they do that a lot with the red states. And I think the service members, basically, they want to be there to do their job. You know, they don't have issues with it. It's the politicians playing games. So right now, I hope I've gotten a little bit of explanation, you know, down there, the basics of it. And when we come back, I'd like you to call in and tell me I'm flat out wrong, because I don't want to be black psyops. I don't want to be gray psyops. I'm white psyops. I'm telling the truth, you know, out here. I might look it up and correct myself. I'm going to correct myself on something that I said in the past, when I'm going to come back and I've researched it and I'm wrong. So when we get back, I'll correct myself, and we'll talk more about why you shouldn't be afraid of all the fear-mongering out there in the legacy media. Oh, 3 minutes? Wow, 3 minutes. Paul, say something
Yes.
for 3 minutes.
Okay, so on the call-ups, under Title 10, that is for the federal troops. So those would be for the federal troops.
Army Reserve.
Now, right. Now, Title 32 are for the state troops or the National Guard units or the reserve units.
Well, no, the reserves don't fall under Title 32. They only fall under Title 10. The National Guard falls under Title. Here's where people get confused, all right? So when the National Guard is called up federally, they are all transferred into the Army Reserve. They transfer from the National Guard to the Army Reserve. Therefore, they fall under Title 10, no longer under Title 32.
Right, but 32 is primarily for the National Guard.
Yes, it's only for the National Guard.
Right, and then there's kind of an interesting issue here, because if they get called up, you know, by the governor or whatever, and it's the National Guard, they fall under the benefits relating to the state.
That's correct.
They don't have the same technical benefits that they would have under a Title 10 call-up. And so they're kind of limited to whatever the state law is for workers. And it's kind of interesting. So that is a concern for the troops, because there is a difference in those.
It is. And you know, the reserves are only subject to federal call-up. They're not subject to state call-up. But the state is subject as part of the militia. Their commander-in-chief, until they're federally called up, is the governor. All right?
Right.
And he can call them up. And he can call them up, but he has to find the funding for that. So the only thing he's mandated to pay them is minimum wage. And the only benefits he's mandated to give them are workers' comp. All right?
Yeah.
But if it's like a national emergency and they call up the National Guard for a hurricane that comes through, and it's declared a national emergency, not just a state emergency, then it's very likely that they're going to be covered under federal funds for, you know, under federal orders. They'll have those orders amended from Title 32 to Title 10.
Right.
All right.
Which can happen after the fact.
Yeah. So when we get back, I'm going to give you my apology for what I was wrong on.